Did you know? There was once a time when people believed that smells could save your life, and sweetness could bring sickness? Yes. Tonight, we drift back to that strange, forgotten world, where bathing was dangerous, and the scent of sweat was seen as protection. But before we begin this story, if you love sleepy tales from long ago, please tap like on this video. And if you never want to miss the next quiet journey into history, then gently subscribe to Historian Sleep and turn the bell icon to all, because here, stories don't shout. They whisper you to sleep. Now, take a deep breath. If the air doesn't smell too holy, and come with me to a time where survival began with a sniff. They thought cleansing the body would purify the soul, but in the shadows of the Middle Ages, to be clean was to invite death. In the medieval world, you didn't escape death by being clean. You escaped it by being careful and sometimes by being utterly filthy. Bathing was not a daily ritual. It wasn't even weekly or monthly. It was a rare event, a cautious ceremony carried out in fear and sometimes in silence. Because to open your pores with warm water was to open yourself to danger. The doctors of the day, such as they were, warned often and sternly. Hot baths, they claimed, softened the skin, made it vulnerable. The heat relaxed the body's defenses, they said, letting bad humors in. And the soul, perhaps, out. Through the warm steam, sickness could slither. Through open pores, evil spirits could slip inside. Through the water itself, death could arrive, unseen and soaking. They called it miasma, the bad air. And to expose one's body, bare and steaming, in a closed room of vapors, that was a gamble with the Grim Reaper. So instead, they layered, first a tunic, then a shirt, then hose, then another tunic, another layer, more cloth, more safety. The body smelled, the minute was sealed. And sweat? That was survival in liquid form. Medieval people believed that natural body odor was not just tolerable, but righteous. The smell of labor, of leather, of the land was to smell like someone still alive, still holy, still here. A clean body was tempting to demons, they thought, but a dirty one? Too grimy to grab. It sounds strange to us to think of dirt as a defense, but to them, filth was sacred. It was said the saints of old did not care for worldly vanities. St. Agnes wore the same robe until it rotted. St. Cuthbert refused to wash, saying his skin would only distract him from prayer. St. Francis of Assisi, he praised the virtue of poverty and stank like it too. In monasteries, monks walked the stone halls like silent shadows. They wore the same coarse robe day after day, year after year. The cloth grew dark with sweat and devotion. Soap was rare and used more for laundry than for limbs. To them, the smell of a monastery was not foul. It was familiar. Beeswax, ink, old parchment, and the scent of long unwashed faith. If you had walked into one of these places, perhaps on a warm July afternoon, the air would have greeted you like a hand on the throat. But no one complained, because cleanliness was not next to godliness. It was next to death. Even royalty avoided the tub. King Louis IX of France, later St. Louis, was known for his piety. He ruled a mighty kingdom, launched crusades, and bathed just twice a year. Maybe once if the year was dry. And yet, he was admired, revered, canonized. No one dared say, he smells, because he didn't just smell of sweat. He smelled of sacrifice. To be clean was vanity. To be dirty was holy. It wasn't just superstition. There was logic, too, at least to them. You see, plague had changed everything. When the Black Death came, it swept through towns like fire through dry grass. And people noticed something. The bathhouses were among the first to fall. These were not dark, secret places, but public hubs. Men and women gathered there, together or separately, to soak, to sing, to gossip, to feel human. Steam rooms, scented oils, warm water, laughter, and then silence. As plague took hold, people stopped going. They whispered that the water was cursed. That steam carried sickness. That warm skin made a better target. Fear seeped in like mold, and one by one, the doors closed. The baths were boarded. The laughter stopped, and water became a thing of suspicion. Instead, they turned to other methods. They hung herbs around their necks: rosemary, thyme, lavender, not for fragrance, but protection. They stuffed their sleeves with cloves, rubbed vinegar beneath their arms, carried posies, wore masks shaped like bird beaks, filled with scented wool. Anything to avoid the real smell of rot, of death. The body became a battlefield, and the weapon? Stink. Women kept their babies wrapped tight, changed linens often, but avoided scrubbing too hard. Because what if the dirt was holding something back? Some believed that devils and demons were slippery and couldn't cling to a greasy man. That sweat made the soul too slick to steal. It was better to be oily than overtaken. In small villages, children were taught this young. A clean child was a vulnerable child. A child who played in mud and slept in wool was safe. There's even record of mothers sniffing their babies' heads to check for illness. Before thermometers, there was scent. And the dead? Even they weren't free from this philosophy. If a corpse did not smell, it was a good sign. Maybe the soul had ascended, but if it stank too fast, perhaps it had been rotten all along. Burial customs reflected this. Some bodies were wrapped in scented cloth, others left open in churches. So the smell could testify. Sainthood had a scent. So did sin. And yet, despite it all, there were exceptions. In noble courts, on feast days, water might be brought, warm and perfumed, for the hands, for the face, a brief rinse before returning to filth. Because always the fear lingered, not of mud, not of smell, but of what might come through with the water. A ghost, a curse, a plague, or worse, an invitation. Because in those dark and drafty stone halls, it was believed that water remembered things, that it carried stories, spirits, regrets, and to wash in it was to open yourself up to everything it carried. So they refused. They layered cloth over skin, sweat over silence, and trudged on, one step at a time, one smell at a time, toward a future they could not yet imagine. A future with faucets, with soap, with daily showers. But for them, for the tired, the frightened, the faithful, the stench was armor. And every time they sniffed the air and smelled themselves, they breathed relief, because the stink was to survive in a world where the nose knew more than the eyes. A whiff of rosemary could be protection, and the wrong smell could be a curse. By day, the medieval world was noisy, filled with the clatter of hooves, iron-tipped carts on cobbled lanes, clang of church bells, and the endless rhythm of labor. But when twilight fell, a hush settled over the land. The wind slowed, fire softened, shadows stretched, and in that hush, scent became the language of fear. They didn't trust what they saw. They feared what they smelled. You see, in those uncertain centuries, smell wasn't just a sense. It was a prophecy, a tool, a warning. A good scent meant life. A foul scent, something sinister, maybe death, maybe damnation. People believed you could sniff out sin, that a liar would smell of sour vinegar, that betrayal had the scent of iron and rot, that the body's odor told on the soul. It was thought that a pure spirit would carry the sweetness of roses. that innocence left behind a trail of lavender or baked bread, and that the wicked reeked, like stagnant water, like rust, like something that had been buried and disturbed. So every breath became an act of judgment. Neighbors sniffed the air when a visitor came calling. Priests noticed if a parishioner smelled of damp straw or old meat. And children were taught a person who smelled too clean might be hiding something. Bathing, remember, was rare and feared. So how did one hide their guilt? With fragrance, not the luxurious kind, not perfume as we know it, but with pouches of crushed herbs, stitched into sleeves and hung around the neck, with orange peels and cloves hidden in pockets, with vinegar rubbed beneath the arms like armor. The war against stench was not just for comfort, it was for protection. They believed miasma, bad air, could sicken you, that a whiff of the wrong thing could bring on fever. So they fought back with strong smells: sage, basil, cinnamon, thyme. Spices weren't just for the kitchen, they were survival tools. Even love had a scent. Lovers gave each other dried violets instead of rings. They kept locks of hair perfumed with mint and tucked in embroidered sachets. Because to smell good meant you were still safe, still worthy, still here. In towns, noble women carried pomanders, little metal balls filled with spiced wax and flowers. They would lift them gently to their noses while walking through crowds. Because the crowds stank. The streets were full of fish guts, horse droppings, rotting hay, sweat, garlic, unwashed feet, all marinating under the sun like a witch's cauldron of decay. And over that scent, layers of protection. Rose oil, camphor, sometimes just plain old smoke. Even in homes, scent rolled. Beds were stuffed with dried lavender. Window sills were lined with rosemary. Some people burned bay leaves in the morning to wake the air. Others sprinkled herbs onto coals, letting sweet smoke drift into every corner. And if someone died, well, then things got serious. Because death, too, had its own smell. And they believed that if a corpse didn't rot quickly, it might be a saint. But if it stank too soon, if the odor clung too fast, the person may have died in sin. Before burial, bodies were sometimes wrapped in vinegar-soaked linen. Others were washed not with water, but with wine, or rubbed with juniper berries, to mask the truth or to invite mercy. Graveyards themselves carried tales of scent. It was said that in holy cemeteries, the air always smelled faintly of myrrh, and that in cursed ground, you could never breathe deeply. The air turned sour as soon as you entered. This wasn't just belief, it was behavioral science, medieval style, because they acted on these fears. Plague doctors, as you've heard, wore bird-like masks, long beaks stuffed with herbs and flowers. Not for vanity, not for costume, but because they believed scent could stop death, that a strong smell blocked out evil spirits, like a holy wall of perfume. They feared the invisible, so they fought it with what they could inhale. One physician wrote, "Where the nose is comforted, the soul shall not be taken." And so, people clutched sprigs of mint. Wives boiled vinegar each evening. Children were made to sleep with onions under their beds. And if a traveler entered town with the wrong odor, doors shut, eyes narrowed. Sometimes even witchcraft was suspected. A woman whose home smelled too sweet, always of rosewater and lilac, was eyed carefully. How does she keep so clean? They asked. What is she hiding? A child who smelled of nothing? Not even sweat or soil. Witchborn, they whispered. Even animals were not immune. Dogs were believed to bark at unclean souls. Cats, it was said, avoided those who carried death smell. And horses, if they reared or neighed in panic near someone, were believed to smell the curse. The fear ran deep. So they taught their children. Don't trust a scentless man. Don't follow the smell of sugar at night. And never, never breathe too deeply in a crowd. It seems strange to us now, this world of fragrant suspicion. But to them, it was science mixed with survival. They trusted what their eyes could not see. Because when the world turned dark, when plague crept through doors and death came quietly, they turned to the only guide they had left, their nose. The air became a map, a warning, a story, and every breath was a decision to stay, to run, to pray, because if something smelled wrong, maybe the devil was near, maybe the plague was settling, maybe the soul was slipping away. And yet, within that fear, they found comfort too. A pot of stew, rich with garlic and thyme, meant warmth. The scent of a fire in the hearth meant safety. The smell of one's children, wild and sweaty and full of life, meant hope. So they didn't just fear smells. They loved them, clung to them, prayed through them. A single rose petal tucked into a prayer book. A sprig of basil hidden beneath a bride's pillow. The scent of one's own sweat after surviving a fever. Each one was a sign that the body still lived, that the soul still sang, and maybe, just maybe, that heaven could still smell it. So now, if the air feels strange one night, if a smell drifts past you that you can't quite place, let it go. It might just be history, brushing past like a ghost in the breeze. And if you ever feel alone, take a deep breath and remember, they feared the invisible too, but they survived. One breath at a time, garlic on skin, vinegar in bowls. They believed if the stench was strong enough, death would pass them by. In the hush of an old stone village, where wind brushed softly over thatched rooftops, a strange thing could bring suspicion. Not a howl in the woods, not a shadow at midnight, but a man who smelled too clean. Because in that time, when sickness crept like fog and every cough was a curse, cleanliness wasn't a virtue. It was a threat. They believed the devil loved a clean body. That water stripped away not just dirt, but protection. And that soap, with its strange lather and smell of flowers, weakened the soul's shield. If you wash too well, you might wash your guardian angels away. Dirt, by contrast, clung like blessing. It was a filter, defense, disguise. To be covered in soot, sweat, and straw was to be hidden from death, from spirits, from fate. So people clung to filth, not out of laziness, but out of fear. Because a clean man might draw a curse, but a filthy one, the devil might pass him by. This was not only whispered in alleys or told by grandmothers, it was preached. There were friars who insisted. The body must wear its labors proudly and not be tempted by vanity. They warned that cleanliness invited pride, and pride, that first of all sins, opened the gate to ruin. So to be unwashed was to be humble, to be safe. Children were taught early. A scraped knee wasn't cleaned with water. It was brushed off, covered in cloth, and kissed with prayer. Mothers told daughters, "You may braid your hair, but do not perfume it. Let the smell of hearth smoke cling." Fathers told sons, "Only the dead have no smell." And grandmothers, with their endless knowledge of roots and rot, reminded everyone, the earth knows her children by scent. Even healers feared the bath. When someone fell ill, the cure was not always to clean them, but to wrap them, to seal them tight in wool and herbs, and sweat the sickness out. They might be laid near hot stones, covered in cloth soaked with vinegar and mustard seed, but rarely bathed, because opening the skin to water was to open the gate. In old apothecaries, tucked between crumbling books and bundles of dried leaves, there were remedies for odor, but not in the way we think of today. One might grind angelica root to ward off bad vapors, mix ash and honey to spread beneath the feet, Burn dried orange peel to sweeten the room. But never, not once, would they advise a full wash. Even the saints knew better. Saint Macarius, it was said, lived in the desert for years, covered in grime, his beard stiff with dust. When asked why he never cleaned himself, he replied, "Because Satan cannot grip what the Lord has anointed in earth." Saint Columba wore a tunic for so long it fused to his skin. Saint Swithin bathed only in rain. Saint Juliana slept in ashes and never once touched soap. To scrub the body was to invite temptation. To stink was to be safe. And still, there were temptations. In wealthy households, once or twice a year, tubs were filled, water was warmed, and for a brief hour, someone would risk it all for comfort. They'd sink into the bath like a sigh, close their eyes, forget the world. But afterward, fear returned. They would step from the tub quickly, wrap themselves in layers, drink hot wine, burn rosemary, whisper prayers, because now their pores were open, their skin soft, their soul, perhaps, exposed. Worse still were those who dared to bathe often. Scholars in great cities, where Roman aqueducts still ran, sometimes defied tradition. They believed in the mind, not the myth. They shaved their beards, perfumed their collars, even scrubbed behind their ears. And others noticed. If plague came to their quarter, the blame was swift. You wash too much, someone would whisper, "She keeps roses in her pillow. Did you not smell them?" A whiff of lavender could condemn you faster than a dagger. Some believed the plague targeted the clean. That water softened you for death. That scent marked you for spirits. And that when the reaper walked among rooftops, he chose his victims by smell. A clean man, newly scrubbed, freshly dressed, breathing deep, too easy. A laborer, thick with sweat and soil, nose clogged with smoke, too messy to bother. So they layered, cloth over tunic, wool over linen, mud over skin. They pressed garlic to their necks, rubbed mustard seed into their soles, tucked thyme into their boots. They stewed in their safety, because that stench might save their lives. Even lovers knew this dance. A kiss might be given, but with herbs between their lips. A hand held, but only after it passed the scent of cloves. To smell strongly was to love deeply, to survive together. And if, during a tryst, one smelled faintly of soap, the mood might sour. "Have you washed?" they might ask in horror. Why would you risk it? Because even pleasure was second to protection. In back rooms and barns, in stone towers and peasant huts, the same wisdom echoed. The cleaner you were, the closer to death. And so, people let their dirt become devotion, let their odor become oath. They stood proudly in their grime, and whispered, "I will not be taken today." It was not just fear, it was philosophy. In the sacred texts of the time, cleanliness was rarely praised. But endurance? Endurance was holy. And there is something holy, isn't there, in choosing to smell like sweat and smoke and soil, just to stay alive? The noblest smells were not rose and honey. They were charred wood, worn leather, wet wool, garlic, ash, earth, and the most trusted people were the ones who carried those smells with them, as naturally as breath. So if, someday, you find yourself alone in an old church, and the air still holds a trace of dust, of wax, of something ancient, you may just be breathing in the memory of a world that believed that scent could save you, and that to be clean was to invite the end. They feared the scent of roses more than rot, because in their world, sweet meant danger, and stink meant salvation. There is a quiet truth the Middle Ages whispered to themselves, not with voices, but with scents, because in their world, wrapped in fog, faith, and fear, What you smelled like could mean the difference between life and death. We tend to think of scent as luxury now. Perfume, cologne, the sweet comfort of clean laundry on a summer morning. But once, it was everything. A shield, a language, a superstition, and sometimes a sentence. Let us drift backward through the mist of time to a cobbled village just after a storm. The streets are slick with rain and refuse. The sky hangs low with smoke from hearths. There are no drains, no bleach, only the squelch of boots and filth, and the silent hope that the stink in the air would keep death away, because people believe deeply that bad smells carry disease, not just marked it, carried it. The plague, when it came, had a scent, sweet, sickly, like overripe fruit melting in the sun. It was said the air before death turned sweet, falsely sweet, and to smell it was to stand on the edge. So they fought back the only way they could, by smelling worse. The ritual of repulsion. To modern ears, it seems absurd, but to them, it was ritual. If the plague smelled sweet, then harsh smells must repel it. Garlic was rubbed onto the skin. Vinegar was splashed beneath the arms. Wormwood, camphor, onions worn in little bags like holy charms. Some even smeared manure beneath their nostrils. Yes, dung in the name of defense. And babies, wrapped not only in swaddling, but in scented linen, not soft powders or creams, but herbs boiled in wine and pressed into cloth, because a clean child was a vulnerable child. A dirty one was harder to steal. Barbers became potion makers. They boiled rosemary and thyme in water, splashing it across door frames, not to clean, but to bless. In some homes, vinegar was poured into bowls and left on every windowsill. A trap for spirits, a sponge for sickness, one whiff of clean air, and it might lure death inside. The monasteries that refused to wash, enshadowed monasteries where candlelight flickered across cold stone walls. Cleanliness was suspect. Washing was vanity. Some monks bathed once a year, others never. One small abbey in the hills of Normandy refused to sweep the cloisters. They believed the dust was holy, that cleanliness would erase the prayers already embedded in the floor. Visitors to such places described the scent as earth and eternity. Books, beeswax, unwashed robes, and stillness. The sacred silence of unbathed devotion. Even incense, meant to purify, was used sparingly, because to change the smell of a place was to risk its soul. Too clean, too cursed. In towns, people whispered about those who smelled too nice. She's always washing. He carries French perfume. What is he hiding? A pleasant scent was suspicious, artificial, deceitful. They said the devil smelled like roses, and so did those who struck deals with him. There were tales, always told at night, of a ghostly woman in white. She appeared before plagues, smelling of lilies. If you followed this scent, you'd vanish. Only your clothes left behind, neatly folded on a stone path. Superstition in every stitch. Smell became woven into clothing. People sewed bundles of herbs directly into seams. They hung pomanders from belts, tiny silver orbs filled with cloves and resin. They tucked mint leaves into their shoes, rubbed garlic behind their ears, and whispered prayers while anointing wrists with vinegar. Midwives rubbed rue across thresholds. Blacksmiths boiled sage for drinking water. Gravediggers chewed fennel seeds to mask the sin of the dead, and of their own fear. No one trusted their eyes alone. They sniffed their way through life. Churches that stank of heaven, even churches, the holiest of places, were rank, not because they were neglected, but because even divinity had a smell. The faithful believed that incense drove away demons. The more it burned, the safer you were. Frankincense, myrrh, copal, pine sap, thick clouds of smoke that clung to cassocks and choristers alike. Some believed saints gave off a divine sin in death, a phenomenon called the odor of sanctity. It was said that the corpse of Saint Teresa of Avila smelled of roses and cinnamon. Even decades after death, pilgrims would visit such relics, not just to see, but to inhale. Children and the rules of smell. Children learned early. Don't smell flowers at night. Don't bathe on Thursdays. If the wind smells too sweet, run. One mother told her son, if you smell bread but see no baker, it's not bread. It's a ghost. Folk tales were steeped in fragrance. Magic spells used thistles and lavender. Curses were delivered on the wind, carried by perfume. And every child learned. The nose knows what the eyes do not. A final stink for the soul. And finally, even in death, smell decided fate. Some said if a body decomposed slowly, it was a sign of holiness. Too fast, and sin clung to the flesh. Before burial, bodies were wrapped in herbs, laurel leaves, hyssop, basil, to sweeten the corpse and confuse the spirits. Funeral cloths were sometimes boiled in vinegar, a final act of love and of fear, because the smell of a soul departing could stay behind. Let the smell settle. So tonight, as your room fills with the soft scent of sleep, pillowcases warmed by your breath, windows shut against the night air, let us remember a world where every breath was weighed, where every inhale was a gamble, a world that smelled of fear, faith, where to survive. You had to stink, not just of sweat, but of hope, because the nose, that humble little guide between the eyes, was once the most trusted of all. So breathe deep, let the past pass, and drift softly into the next tale. They couldn't stop the plague, but they could sweeten the air with cloves and silver balls, rose water on corpses, and lavender drifting through cathedrals. They tried to mask a dying world, one breath at a time. In the winding alleys of medieval towns, the air was rarely still. It murmured, it swirled, it carried whispers through shuttered windows and secrets under doorways. It hummed with the faint chanting from distant chapels, the iron rhythm of horseshoes against cobblestones, and always the thick, invisible perfume of life, raw and filtered and unavoidable. This was not a world of rose-scented candles or lemon detergent, not a place of laundry days and lavender sachets tucked in drawers. No, this was a world where scent ruled, where the air itself could be an omen, barrier, or a blessing. Because here, smell wasn't decoration. It was survival, a cloak of herbs and smoke. Let us follow a peasant, old boots, threadbare cloak, hands thick with soil. Look closely at the seams of his cloak. What do you see? Tucked into the folds are sprigs of rosemary, dried thyme, sage tied in thread, not for fashion, not for fragrance, to ward off death. He walks through the market, where the air is thick with smoke from coal fires, blood from wagon wheels, and the sharp pang of sweat. Yet he walks protected, swathed in a veil of scent, for he believes, as many did, that smell was a shield. Plague doctors, with their haunting, bird-like masks, walk the streets of pestilence like slow-moving omens, but inside those grotesque beaks, not menace, not mystery, herbs, vinegar, crushed rose petals. They breathed through a bouquet of defense, and the ritual was always the same. Before entering a sick room, you lit a sprig of rosemary. Before lifting a dying hand, you pressed garlic into your palm. Before kissing the forehead of someone fevered, you held your breath, because scent, they believed, was not passive. It was a line in the sand, perfume for the living and the dead. Among the rich, terror took on elegant disguises. In France, perfumed gloves became a trend. stitched with civet, ambergris, musk, not for vanity, to protect the hands from poisoned air. Handkerchiefs soaked in floral oils were carried in purses, held discreetly to the nose, a small luxury and a life preserver. They didn't bathe, that much we know, but they perfumed their pillows, their undergarments, their boots, their corsets, even their wigs. To survive, they scented everything but the skin. And what of the dead? Corpses were not simply buried. They were dressed, wrapped, perfumed, rose petals, hyssop, lavender in the coffin, not for beauty, not even for kindness, but because bad smell meant bad death. And to mask the rot was to send the soul off sweetly, a nose for the divine. In the incense-heavy air of cathedrals, scent rose like prayer. The devout believed that certain smells were holy, that the smoke of frankincense didn't just cleanse the air, it cleansed the spirit. Some monks were said to have such refined senses of smell. They could sniff out sin, the sin of decay, of indulgence, corruption. And in rare tales, a miracle would arrive not with a trumpet, but with a breeze. It was said that saints, when they died in grace, did not rot. Their flesh remained whole, and they gave off the scent of flowers. It was called the odor of sanctity, a body buried in the ground, and yet the air smelled of violets, lilies, cinnamon, a divine whisper through the nose. The world came by fragrance. Scent guided everyday life. It told lovers who to trust. It warned farmers of spoiled grain. It judged water, markets, marriages. Before a bride accepted a suitor, she might ask to sniff the inside of his tunic. A man who reeked of smoke and meat? Hardworking. Safe. A man who smelled too sweet? What was he hiding? Markets were judged by their odor. If the fish stall didn't smell, it meant someone was masking rot. If the baker's stall was too fragrant, it might mean witchcraft. And children? Mothers sniffed their children's hair each morning, not for lice, but for fever. A sudden sour scent meant something brewing within. A sweet smell on the wind, but no source. They ran, because sweetness without source was never trusted. Charms of the nose. Women wore pomanders. Small metal orbs hung on delicate chains. Inside, a crumbled mix of cinnamon, clove, nutmeg, and rose. Each step they took, a ripple of perfume followed. Not just elegance, protection. Men carried scent pouches near the heart, full soaked in wine and mint. They'd press it to their faces when walking through crowds, breathing through cloth like a monk through incense. Babies were wrapped in blankets soaked in vinegar. When they cried, they were comforted not only by touch, but by ritual. The smell said they were safe, the last breath of belief. As night fell and the fires dimmed, the world quieted, but the smells remained. If a home smelled of onions and firewood, it was healthy. If it smelled of flowers without flowers, it was cursed. Villagers left bowls of salt and vinegar at their doors. They believed the wind would drink it, taking death with it. Some slept with garlic under the pillow. Some washed only when the moon was full. Some burned sage and whispered, "Leave us be. Smell only the brave." Tonight, as you lie in a world of soft linen and filtered air, where soap smells of mangoes and rainwater, where no one rubs onion on their doorframe, remember, there was a time when every inhale could be your last, when a breath was a question, and smell was the only answer. The nose ruled the soul, and to stink humbly, faithfully at, was to live another day. So if a strange scent floats past you, don't wrinkle your nose. Somewhere, deep in time, a mother, a monk, plague doctor, breathed the same wind, and whispered, "It's not just a smell, it's a warning. Let it pass. Let the air settle. Let the night hold you gently, and drift to sleep. And now, you've drifted through the scents of a forgotten world, where fear clung to the air, where to be clean was dangerous, and where superstition whispered louder than science ever could. But look where you are now, safe, quiet, bathed in soft light, and far, far from plague or potion. If this tale brought you even a moment of peace tonight, please give it a gentle like. Let us know in the comments. What lingered with you the most? Was it the fear of bathing, or the idea that a bad smell could save your life? And if you'd like to wander again, through strange corners of history, through stories that don't shout, but softly lull you toward sleep, then please subscribe to Historian Sleep and tap that bell to set notifications to all. So next time, when sleep feels far away, a new tale will be waiting for you. Because that's what we hope for. That somewhere out there, someone hears our stories and sleeps a little better. Good night and sleep well.